OPB Podcasts.
It's OPB Politics Now for Tuesday, July 15th. For months, there's been speculation that U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley would not seek re-election. But we learned last week that one of the United States Senate's most outspoken progressives will indeed seek a fourth term. We'll break that down and dig into the latest rumblings about a possible special legislative session in Salem. Welcome to the podcast. It's a bit of a summer grab bag this week. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
And I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
Dirk, Merkley has been in Congress for a long time, since 2009. So normally it's not that surprising that he's seeking re-election, but this time was noteworthy because we heard rumblings from a lot of credible sources that maybe he was going to step aside. You even had a story pretty much ready to go saying as much. That did not happen.
It didn't happen. No, actually, last Thursday, I had just had a conversation with someone who seemed to think Merkley was very seriously considering stepping down, actually said, a lot of potential candidates that might be interested were kind of counting on it. A lot of interest groups that might want to have a hand in an Oregon Senate race were sort of counting on it and really expecting it. I hung up that call to find an announcement in my inbox, basically saying that was not the case. Merkley had decided to run for re-election. Pretty clearly, that was after a lot of thought. I don't think this was a slam dunk. People were not wrong to suspect he was weighing his options, but this is the direction he chose.
So what can you tell us about his decision-making process? What ultimately compelled him to run, and why was it a harder decision for him this election cycle than it has been in previous ones?
Yeah, I mean, let's first note, this isn't the first time there's been big questions about Merkley's plans. Remember back in 2020, he had just spent 3 or 4 years railing against the Trump administration, sometimes in some pretty high profile ways. There was a question whether or not he might attempt to run for president. He was very seriously considering throwing his hat in the ring, ultimately decided against it. So not a first for him to sort of be weighing his options. This time, I think Merkley made clear, one, as I said, this was not a slam dunk decision. He was actually maybe leaning against it. Here is what he told reporters last week.
If you had asked me a few months ago, and if I had confided in you, which I kept my thoughts to myself, just Mary and I, as we wrestled with it, said we were leaning towards not running. But the magnitude of the darkness and danger that Trump is presenting, so dark and so dangerous that I am calling on everyone to be off the couch.
Merkley there mentioned his wife, Mary, who he said has been integral in helping him think through and decide what his next steps were. But, he laid out a number of things that influenced his decision to remain in the Senate. Obviously, he's only announcing his reelection. It's not a slam dunk, but he's an incumbent. He's got a lot of influence. I think most people think it will be, possible. So one of the things he says influenced him is that big, beautiful bill Republicans passed earlier this month. That will lead to things like people being taken off of Medicaid. It could force cuts to state SNAP food assistance programs, major cuts potentially. I think more generally, Merkley says he's got real concerns that Trump is trying to become what he called a strong man, that there is a deferential Republican-controlled Congress that is sort of letting him do whatever, and that really convinced him he needs to stick around.
It's pretty common practice that when a longtime elected official like Merkley starts thinking about retirement, people just, start lining up to replace him. And this was no different. We saw websites pop up like Andrea Salinas for Senate.com and Janelle Bynum for Senate.com.
Yeah, right. All indications, including some of those website registrations you're talking about, were that a number of the state's congressional delegation were very, very interested in this open seat, which is, of course, as you say, no surprise. Andrea Salinas, who is in her second term, I think was being looked at as one of the people most seriously most seriously looking into mounting a run for the seat. Suzanne Bonamici, who is the state's longest tenured U.S. House member, was said to be very interested in running for Senate someday. And we did hear that both of the state's freshman Democratic congresswomen, Maxine Dexter and Janelle Bynum, might be looking at jumping in. This was a real free-for-all potentially. And, that would have been very interesting pretty quickly because, not only would we maybe have had all these seasoned politicians squaring off in a Democratic primary, but if they had made that decision, one or more of them, to go for Senate, then suddenly we have one or more open U.S. House seats in Oregon because they couldn't run for both Senate and House, right? And that would have opened up those seats. There could have been a cascading effect down Oregon politics where lawmakers and whoever else is jumping in for the House. It just could have led to a lot of different impacts. We're not seeing that, obviously, now.
We are not seeing that. One thing that we have seen, and I mentioned at top, is that, Merkley, he's really become one of the most outspoken progressives in the Senate. He was one of only 2 senators to call for a ceasefire in Gaza in 2023. He was the only senator to endorse Senator Bernie Sanders in 2016 over Hillary Clinton. And he got a lot of attention during the first Trump administration when he traveled to Texas to try and get into a Walmart where children were being held after being separated from their parents.
Right.
What sense do you get? I mean, what do you think we can expect to see from him in the next term, assuming he is reelected?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't lay it all out. I think he definitely said some things, but one thing he made clear, very clear, and we heard it in the clip from him earlier, is his central reason for running again is to try to do everything possible to stand up to a Trump administration that I think he believes is sort of running amok and fundamentally altering the nature of executive power in this country. Whether he can have a lot of impact at that, I think is very much up for debate. Democrats are famously sort of struggling to respond to this administration and current Republican control of Congress. But Merkley has influential roles in a couple places, right? He's on the Appropriations Committee, so he's got a role in figuring out federal spending. He's on the Foreign Affairs Committee, so he's got his hand in international relations and those debates. And I think his intent is really going to be to leverage, the relationships, the gravitas he's amassed in Washington over the past 16 years and have an impact where he can. And he's also got all the pet causes that he's always had, right? He's a progressive. He's a climate change hawk. He really, really doesn't like the current filibuster rules in the Senate, which he's been trying to change pretty much for his entire congressional career. So those things will continue as well, we assume.
All right, let's make a pivot here to state politics. The state is still reeling from the fallout of the failed transportation package. Our listeners already know that lawmakers adjourned without passing the transportation package, which was seen by Democrats anyway as a failure. The day after session, the governor made it very clear she was considering calling lawmakers back to Salem. She did not care who was taking vacation or when. Is that still the case?
That is absolutely still the case. The governor is very involved. I mean, in the last week, she has been in discussions with top Democrats. She has spoken at least once with the Republican leaders in the House and Senate about the possibility of a special session. All indications are that Democrats are working feverishly to put together some package that will accomplish at least a subset of the goals they had attempted to achieve with that ambitious transportation package that failed. There is just not a lot of clarity when that might come together at this point. We are talking on a Tuesday, is something going to be announced tomorrow? Is something going to be announced next week? Just unclear.
On the last day of the session, this transportation package was changing constantly. I mean, in real time, negotiations were going late into the night. The governor was, in the caucus rooms, like hashing out the details. What do we know now about the contents of an actual package? Like, do we have any new details?
Yeah, I mean, I think a number of things seem clear, and maybe I'm going to be proven very wrong, but a number of things seem clear to me at this point. People I have spoken with on both sides of the aisle actually say the governor seems to be talking seriously about a 6-cent increase to the gas tax as just a general proposition. If you remember, Lauren, as Democrats were floundering to pass something on that last day, they attempted to pass a 3-cent gas tax increase at the last minute. that was this sort of Band-Aid option that they intended to prevent layoffs at ODOT, but it really infuriated state and local governments who would have been cut out of that deal altogether. So now Kotek is said to be thinking about a 6-cent increase. That would be enough to fill a funding hole at ODOT, prevent layoffs, and get money, at least some money, for state and local governments. I think, the question is what else the governor and top Democrats need or want to include to make this palatable. So, for instance, do they include registration and titling fee hikes to raise more revenue? Do they include a bump to the existing payroll tax Oregonian workers pay to find more money for public transit? That is something, Republicans were very, very critical of during the session. It's something that progressive Democrats really want. So how do you split the baby there? A couple other questions, like, do they include changes to the way the state taxes heavy trucks? That's been demanded really by Republicans and the trucking industry. Do they try to do something about a road usage charge, the system that had been proposed that would force EV drivers to sign up for this program where they pay for every mile they drive? There is just a lot possible here. There's a lot that they were considering. I've gotten a number of different suggestions about what a special session bill might address. No one seems to know where this will ultimately come down.
So, a lot of policy questions and also a lot of real questions about just how logistically this might work, because the Capitol is still undergoing a massive renovation project.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the moment lawmakers adjourned the session on June 27, just at the it was like 11:15 or something on June 27. The Capitol became off limits. Construction crews are in the final couple months of this massive effort to sort of seismically retrofit the building. And so as part of that, both chambers are closed off. In fact, I heard today, both chambers are expected to be closed until at least September, when only the Senate is expected to be open temporarily. So they are really shuttered right now as this project moves forward. That means that even if lawmakers can find this agreement on some plan that can pass quickly in a special session, they are not apparently going to have access to their chambers, to the building in the ways they normally would. So the question is, where do they go? I've heard, Willamette University right across the street from the Capitol is being considered, or some high school auditorium in Salem could be a possibility. It's just not super clear right now. I think another complicating factor is that this is summer vacation season, as Kotek mentioned, as you mentioned up top. I mean, she said she didn't care about lawmakers' summer plans. That's fine. But if they are on vacation, they're not going to be available to help create a quorum. So I think we have to engage with that. And so those are just more logistics that need to be worked out.
And in the meantime, we should probably note that there's some serious layoffs at the Oregon Department of Transportation that seem rather imminent, and time is sort of the essence if the governor is going to try and avoid those. Is that even possible?
I mean, I think it's possible, like in theory, right? Like what we know is that ODOT has said it plans to lay off around 500 workers on July 31st if funding can't be found. So, if the legislature were to somehow meet ahead of that date, approve money, those layoffs would presumably be diverted. And we know that the unions that represent those workers have a forceful campaign right now, urgently communicating to lawmakers what cuts would mean, what kinds of positions would go away, what that would mean practically. But really, this is not satisfying, but it just feels like a very open question right now, whether the legislature can act in time, given all the other things that we've been talking about. And if they don't, but assuming they do find money at some point, I think we just see a lot of chaos and inefficiency where all these people are being laid off. Then suddenly ODOT has the money to rehire them. What does that look like? Like, how messy is all that? Do some people say, I'm leaving state employment because I can find a better job elsewhere, so we are losing qualified workers? I mean, there's no way it doesn't get extremely, extremely messy should these layoffs move forward.
A lot of unknowns, but we do know we'll be back to keep everybody posted. So let's leave this conversation here today. Dirk, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Lauren.
This week's episode was produced by Andrew Thien. Our audio engineer is Naleen Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We will be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.